In 1943, on the frozen fields of the Eastern Front and the dusty plains of North Africa, the German Panther and Tiger tanks were the undisputed kings of the battlefield. They were masterpieces of steel, heavy, terrifying, and armed with guns that could snipe a target from a mile away. To the German Panzerwaffe, the American M4 Sherman was a joke. They called it the Ronson, after the famous cigarette lighter, because they claimed it lit up the first time, every time it was hit. But then, the German High Command did something the Americans didn't expect. They captured a fully functional Sherman tank and sent it back to the secret testing grounds at Kummersdorf, outside of Berlin. The engineers who walked circles around that captured prize were the same men who built the Tiger, the most complex fighting machine on Earth. They expected to find a crude, poorly built tractor. They expected to confirm their own superiority. But as they opened the hatches and climbed inside, the laughter started to fade. They started with the engine. In a German Tiger, the engine was a temperamental beast that required constant maintenance from a team of specialists. If a Tiger's transmission broke, you practically had to take the entire tank apart to fix it. Then they looked at the Sherman. They found a power plant that was so simple, a farm boy from Iowa could fix it with a wrench and a screwdriver. They found parts that were interchangeable, something almost unheard of in the German army. But the real light bulb moment happened when they checked the odometer. A German tank was lucky to go 60 miles without a major mechanical failure. This captured Sherman had traveled hundreds of miles across the desert, through sand and heat, and when the German mechanic turned the key, it roared to life on the very first try. The engineers at Kummersdorf began to realize a terrifying truth. They weren't just fighting a tank, they were fighting a philosophy. They were building a few thousand Swiss watches to fight a war, while the Americans were building tens of thousands of sledgehammers. This is the story of the moment the German experts stopped looking at the Sherman as a target and started looking at it as a prophecy. A prophecy that told them, in no uncertain terms, that they were going to lose the war. Part 1. The Detroit Stomp. While the German engineers at Kummersdorf were poking and prodding the captured Sherman, they weren't just looking for armor thickness or gun penetration. They were looking at the soul of the machine. And what they found terrified them. You see, in Germany, building a tank was considered handwork, a craft. A Tiger tank was like a fine Swiss watch or a high-end luxury car. Each one was hand-fitted by master mechanics in black overalls. If a part didn't fit perfectly, they would take a file and spend 3 hours hand-shaping the steel until it did. It was beautiful, it was precise, and it was a strategic disaster. The German engineers realized that while they were building art, the Americans were building appliances. The Michigan Miracle. The Americans had a secret weapon that Hitler never understood: Detroit. Before the war, companies like Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors had mastered the art of making millions of cars for the average person. When the war started, they didn't learn how to make tanks. They taught the tank how to be a car. The German testers noticed something impossible on the captured Sherman. They looked at the serial numbers on the bolts, the engine block, and the transmission. They realized that a bolt from a Sherman built in Michigan in January was exactly the same as a bolt from a Sherman built in Ohio in June. This is what we call interchangeability. In the German army, if your Tiger broke a gear in the middle of a Russian winter, you had to wait weeks for a factory spec replacement that might still need hand filing to fit. In the American army, you just scavenged a gear from a wrecked tank nearby, slapped it in with a basic wrench, and you were back in the fight in 30 minutes. The Detroit Stomp was the sound of 50,000 Shermans hitting the floorboards of history. The math of the massacre: one German engineer reportedly sat down with a notepad and did the math. He knew that Germany had produced roughly 1,350 Tiger tanks during the entire war. He then looked at the production figures coming out of the United States. The Chrysler tank arsenal in Warren, Michigan, alone was cranking out over 700 Shermans every single month. One single American factory was producing more tanks in 2 months than the entire German Reich could produce in 3 years of Tiger production. The Germans were fighting a war of quality. The Americans were fighting a war of logistics and attrition. The German testers found that the Sherman was designed to be shipped in crates, loaded onto ships, and dropped onto a beach with almost zero preparation. A Tiger tank required a specialized railway car, a team of 20 engineers just to change the tracks for transport, and a bridge that wouldn't collapse under its 60-ton weight. The good enough philosophy. The most painful realization for the German experts was the American philosophy of good enough. The Sherman wasn't the best tank in the world. Its armor was thinner than a Panther's. Its gun was weaker than a Tiger's, but it was good enough to win. The Americans realized that 5 average tanks will beat 1 perfect tank every single time. The German engineers saw that the Sherman was built with a service life. They didn't expect the tank to last for 20 years. They expected it to last for 6 months of brutal combat, be easily repaired, or be replaced by 2 more just like it. By the time the sun went down on the first week of testing at Kummersdorf, the mood in the German camp had shifted from arrogance to a cold, sinking dread. They realized they weren't just fighting an army of soldiers. They were fighting an army of assembly lines. They were fighting an industrial behemoth that viewed war as a mass production problem. As one German officer supposedly remarked while looking at the Sherman's simple, rugged engine, "We are fighting people who build tanks like we build kitchen toasters." How do you stop a country that can outproduce your ability to kill them? Part 2. The Ergonomic Edge. The German engineers at Kummersdorf had already been shocked by the Sherman's engine and its assembly line perfection. But then, they did something simple. They climbed inside. To a German tanker, the interior of a Tiger or a Panther was a masterpiece of specialized complexity. It was cramped, dark, and filled with razor-sharp edges and intricate dials that required a PhD to operate. The Germans believed that a soldier should be as tough as the steel protecting him. If the seat was uncomfortable or the space was tight, that was just the price of being a warrior. But when those German testers sat in the Sherman, they found something they didn't expect. They found a workspace designed for a human being. The 1-second rule. The first thing they noticed was the escape hatch in a German tank. Getting out of a burning vehicle was a death sentence. The hatches were heavy, manual, and often required a complex locking mechanism to open. If your tank was hit and the oil started to spray, you were likely going to roast inside that steel coffin before you could crawl out. The Sherman was different. It featured spring-loaded hatches that could be popped open with a single flick of a lever. The German engineers timed it. An American crew could bail out of a burning Sherman in less than 5 seconds. A German crew, they'd be lucky to make it out in 15. In the brutal math of tank warfare, those 10 seconds were the difference between a veteran crew surviving to fight another day in a new tank and 5 charred bodies left in a wreck. The Americans realized that the tank was replaceable. The men were not. He who sees first wins next. The Germans looked at the optics. They always bragged that their Zeiss lenses were the best in the world, and they were. But the German vision was tunneled. To see out of a Tiger, you usually had to be looking through a high magnification scope. It was like trying to navigate a room while looking through a drinking straw. The Sherman, however, was covered in periscopes. Every crew member, from the driver to the loader, had their own way to see the world, outside without sticking their head out of the hatch. The commander had a 360-degree view of the battlefield. The German testers realized a terrifying reality. In a tank duel, the better gun doesn't matter if you can't find the enemy. Because the Sherman crew had better situational awareness, they were almost always the ones who saw the enemy first, turned their turret first, and fired first. The gyrostabilizer, shooting on the move then. They found the magic box. Under the Sherman's massive 75mm gun was a device called a gyrostabilizer. In 1944, this was space-age technology. It used a series of gyroscopes to keep the gun level even while the tank was bouncing over rough terrain. German tanks had to come to a complete, dead stop to fire accurately. If they fired while moving, they'd hit the clouds or the dirt. But the Sherman could keep its gun pointed roughly at the target while charging forward at 15 miles per hour. It wasn't perfect, and many American crews didn't even know how to use it properly. But to the German engineers, it was a revelation. It meant the Sherman could close the distance, dodging and weaving, while the German tank sat still like a stationary target, waiting to be hit. The science of exhaustion. Finally, the engineers looked at the controls. Driving a German Panther was a physical workout that would exhaust an Olympic athlete. The steering was heavy, the gears were temperamental, and the noise was deafening. After 6 hours of driving, a German crew was half dead from fatigue. The Sherman? It drove like a Buick. It had a steering system that was light and responsive. It had padded seats. It had a layout that made sense. The German testers realized that an American crew would arrive at the battlefield fresh, alert, and ready to kill. The German crew would arrive tired, grumpy, and slow to react. The comfort of the Sherman wasn't a luxury. It was a force multiplier. It was the realization that a tank is only as lethal as the 5 men inside it. By making the tank easier to live in, easier to see out of, and easier to escape from, the Americans had built a machine that boosted the survival rate of their most valuable asset, human experience. The German engineers at Kummersdorf stepped out of the Sherman and looked at their own Tiger tanks with a new sense of doubt. They had built a steel monster, but the Americans had built a lethal, mobile office. And in a long war of attrition, the office was going to win every single time. Part 3. The Logistics Nightmare. The German engineers at Kummersdorf were geniuses of the laboratory. They could design a gun that could pierce a mountain, but they had forgotten one simple, dirty truth about war. Tanks don't just fight, they break. As the testing continued into its second week, the German experts faced a sobering reality. They looked at their own masterpiece, the Panther, and then at the captured Sherman. They realized that while the German tank was a warrior, the Sherman was a worker. The difference was buried in the wheels. The wheel of torture. If you look at a German Tiger or Panther tank, you'll see a complex, beautiful system of interleaved road wheels. The wheels overlap each other like a deck of cards. The Germans did this to distribute the tank's massive weight and create a smooth ride for the gunner. But the German engineers at the test site knew the secret nightmare of this design. If a mine blew off one of the inner wheels, or if a piece of frozen mud got jammed in the back, you had to remove as many as 5 outer wheels just to get to the one that was broken. In a clean, heated factory in Germany, this was a puzzle. In a freezing, muddy field in France, with Allied artillery screaming overhead, it was a death sentence. It could take a German crew a full day of backbreaking labor just to change one wheel. Then, they looked at the Sherman. The Americans used a system called vertical volute spring suspension. It was a series of simple, self-contained bogies bolted to the outside of the hull. If a Sherman hit a mine and lost a wheel, the crew didn't need a crane or a factory team. They could unbolt the entire unit, swap it for a new one, and be back in the fight in less than an hour. The German testers realized that the Sherman was designed to be repaired by a man with a hangover and a single wrench. Their own tanks were designed to be repaired by a clockmaker. The transmission trap, it got worse when they looked at the guts of the machines. In a German Tiger, the transmission, the massive gearbox that makes the tank move, was buried deep in the center of the hull. To replace it, you had to literally peel the top of the tank off. You needed a massive overhead crane and a week of time. In the Sherman, the transmission was at the very front, protected by a rounded bolt-on cover. If the gears stripped, you just unbolted the nose of the tank, slid the old transmission out, and slid a new one in. The German engineers did the math. For every 100 hours of combat, a Tiger tank required over 10 hours of intense, specialized maintenance. A Sherman? It required less than 2. This meant that even if Germany had as many tanks as the Americans, half of the German fleet would always be stuck in the repair shop, while 98% of the American fleet was ready to kill. The logistical tale, but the real, aha, Moment happened when the Germans looked at the supply crates that came with the captured Sherman. They found that the Sherman's parts were standardized. The engine in the tank was often the same engine used in American landing craft or heavy trucks. The bolts were standard sizes. The tools were universal. The Americans had built a logistical tail that stretched 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean, yet it was more efficient than the German supply line that was only 50 miles away. The German engineers realized that the United States wasn't just sending tanks to Europe. They were sending a system. They were sending a plug-and-play army. A German officer reportedly looked at the Sherman and said, "We build tanks to win battles. The Americans build tanks to win wars." He realized that you can win every battle on the field. But if your tanks are all sitting in the mud waiting for a custom-fitted bolt from a factory in Berlin that has just been bombed into rubble, you have already lost. The Sherman wasn't just a tank. It was a message from Detroit. We can outfix you, outsupply you, and outlast you. Part 4, The Final Duel. By late 1944, the German engineers at the Kummersdorf testing grounds had seen enough. They had taken the Sherman apart, piece by piece. They understood its engine, its ergonomics, and its logistics. But there was one question left. How did this average tank actually stand up against the terrifying monsters of the Third Reich? The Germans decided to run a head-to-head comparison. In one lane, they had their pride and joy, the Tiger II, also known as the King Tiger. In the other lane, the captured American M4 Sherman. On paper, this wasn't a fight. It was an execution. The heavyweight, the King Tiger. The King Tiger was a 70-ton mountain of steel. Its frontal armor was nearly 7 inches thick, so dense that almost no Allied gun could penetrate it from the front. It carried the legendary 88mm KWK-43 gun, a weapon that could vaporize a Sherman from over 2 miles away. To the German engineers, the King Tiger was the invincible tank. It was a fortress on tracks. The challenger, the Sherman then, there was the Sherman. It weighed only 30 tons less than half of the King Tiger. Its armor was barely 2.5 inches thick. Its 75mm gun was designed for infantry support, not for hunting heavy tanks. The German testers looked at the two machines and laughed. They called the Sherman a Tommy cooker. They believed that for every King Tiger they built, the Americans would need 10 Shermans just to scratch the paint. But as the testing moved into tactical simulations, the laughter stopped. The turret race, the 5-second death sentence. The German engineers discovered a terrifying tactical flaw in their heavy tanks. The King Tiger's turret was massive, weighing many tons. To turn that turret 360 degrees, the German gunner had to rely on a complex hydraulic system that was tied to the engine's speed. If the engine wasn't revving at high power, the turret crawled like a snail. In some cases, it took over 60 seconds to make a full circle. Then they timed the Sherman. The American tank used a high-speed electric hydraulic traverse. With the flick of a wrist, the Sherman's turret could whip around a full circle in just 15 seconds. The German testers realized a horrific scenario. If a Sherman managed to sneak up on a King Tiger's side or rear, the German crew was helpless. The Sherman could literally drive circles around the Tiger, keeping its gun pointed at the German's weak side armor, while the King Tiger's massive gun struggled to catch up. In the world of tank duels, he who fires first wins. The Sherman was faster on the draw. The reliability trap, the 70-ton anchor next. The Germans tested operational endurance. They ordered both tanks to drive 20 miles across broken, muddy terrain. The Sherman bounced along, its simple suspension soaking up the hits. It finished the course, refueled, and was ready for more. The King Tiger? It didn't even make it to the halfway point. Its massive weight was too much for its own transmission. The final drive gears, the parts that actually turned the tracks, shattered under the pressure of 70 tons of steel. The King Tiger became a 70-ton stationary pillbox. The German engineers realized that their invincible tank was a logistical nightmare. In a real war, A tank that breaks down on the way to the battle is just as useless as a tank that gets blown up. Firepower versus reality. Finally, they looked at the guns. The German 88mm was a masterpiece of physics. It could punch through anything. But the German testers noticed something about the American 75mm gun on the Sherman. While it couldn't penetrate the front of a Tiger, it had a much higher rate of fire. An American crew could fire 3 shells for every 1 shell the German crew could get off. The Americans didn't try to punch through the front armor. They used a tactic called blind and flank. They would fire high explosive or smoke shells at the Tiger's vision blocks, blinding the German crew. While the German commander was rubbing his eyes and screaming for the turret to turn, 3 other Shermans would have already raced around to his side and pumped shells into his thin-skinned engine compartment. The bitter conclusion: the German engineers at Kummersdorf sat in their office and looked at the data. They realized that the King Tiger was a weapon for a war that didn't exist. It was built for a fair fight, one-on-one, on an open plain. But the Americans weren't interested in a fair fight. The Sherman was built for a total war. It was fast, it was reliable, it could cross almost any bridge, and it could be repaired with a hammer. The German experts realized that they were building elite weapons for a losing army, while the Americans were building a winning system for an unstoppable one. They saw that the Sherman wasn't a joke, it was an industrial sledgehammer. And no matter how thick they made their armor, Detroit was simply going to keep swinging that sledgehammer until the Third Reich was nothing but dust. As the final report was written, one engineer supposedly noted, "We have the better tank. They have the better war machine." And in the end, the machine always wins. Part 5. The final verdict. The war did not end in a laboratory or a testing ground. It ended in the ruins of Berlin. But for the engineers at Kummersdorf, the war of ideas had been lost long before the first Soviet flag flew over the Reichstag. As they filed away their final reports on the captured Sherman, they had to confront a truth that shattered their ideology. They had spent years believing in the superiority of German genius, convinced that their elite technology would always triumph over mass-produced simplicity. But the Sherman had taught them a lesson in humility. It proved that in a global war of attrition, a good weapon that is available in the thousands is infinitely more lethal than a perfect weapon that only exists in the dozens. The death of the Ronson myth. For years, the Germans and even some Allied soldiers had mocked the Sherman as the Ronson or the Tommy Cooker. They claimed it was a fire trap. But the German engineers, after their deep dive testing, discovered a startling reality. The Sherman was actually one of the safest tanks of the entire war. In the early models, the ammunition was stored in dry racks along the sides. When the tank was hit, the shells would often explode, leading to the Ronson nickname. But the Americans didn't just ignore the problem, they innovated. They introduced wet stowage. They moved the ammunition to the floor of the tank and surrounded the shells with a mixture of water and antifreeze. The German testers found that while a hit to a Tiger often resulted in a catastrophic explosion that killed the entire crew, the wet Sherman almost never burned. Statistically, an American tank crew had a much higher chance of surviving a hit than a German crew. The Tommy Cooker was a myth that the Germans wanted to believe, but the data proved them wrong. The veteran factor. Survival as a weapon. This leads to the most critical realization the German experts had. Because the Sherman was easy to escape from, and because it didn't explode as often as they thought, American tank crews were surviving their first, second, and even third tank losses. In the German army, when a Tiger was destroyed, you usually lost 5 highly trained, elite soldiers. They were irreplaceable. But in the American army, the crew would bail out, wait for a new Sherman to arrive from the nearest depot, and be back in the fight within 48 hours. The Americans were farming experience. By 1945, the average American tank commander was a battle-hardened veteran who had survived multiple engagements. The German commanders, by contrast, were often teenagers with only a few weeks of training, because the veterans had all died in their perfect tanks. The German engineers realized that the Sherman wasn't just protecting soldiers, it was preserving the army's brainpower. The universal soldier, the final shock was the Sherman's versatility. The German engineers had built specialized tanks for every task. They had tank hunters, infantry support tanks, and heavy breakthrough tanks. This created a logistical nightmare. But the Sherman was a universal platform. With a few minor changes, the Americans turned the Sherman into a bulldozer, a flamethrower, a rocket launcher, and even a duplex drive swimming tank that could launch from a ship and drive onto a beach. The Sherman fought in the jungles of the Pacific, the deserts of Africa, the mud of Italy, and the forests of Germany. It was the ultimate multi-tool. The German testers realized that while they were trying to win a game of chess with a few powerful pieces, the Americans were playing a game of global logistics with a piece that could do everything. The legacy of the sledgehammer. When the German engineers looked at their final data, they saw the future. The age of the super heavy tank, like the King Tiger, was over. Those monsters were too slow, too expensive, and too fragile. The future belonged to the main battle tank, a vehicle that balanced firepower, mobility, and reliability. The Sherman was the grandfather of that concept. Adolf Hitler had wanted a fortress on tracks. The Americans gave him a factory on tracks. The German engineers at Kummersdorf finally understood that the Sherman was the sledgehammer of liberty. It wasn't designed to be pretty. It wasn't designed to be a legend. It was designed to win. Today, the M4 Sherman is remembered as the tank that won the war. Not because it was the strongest, but because it was the smartest. It was a testament to the power of democratic industry and the value of human life over mechanical perfection. The hunters of the Panzerwaffe learned the hard way. Never underestimate an enemy who treats war like an assembly line, and never bet against a machine built by people who are free to think, free to innovate, and determined to go home.